All right, so what is Advocates for Children? We're an independent agency that protects the rights of all New York City students. We were founded in 1971 by parents of students with disabilities, and our mission has expanded over the years, but essentially, our mission is to ensure a high quality education for New York students who face barriers to academic success. And we really focus on working with students from low income backgrounds. We have a number of services that we provide. We have a helpline, and the number is there. It's 1-866-427-6033. They're available Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the folks who staff the helpline are able to answer questions, provide resources, and then potentially connect callers with advocates or attorneys. We provide free legal services to low-income families. We have a number of guides and resources that are available on our website that kind of cover a number of education matters and issues. We provide workshops and trainings and webinars like this one. And then we do policy advocacy and impact litigation work as well. So AFC's School Justice Project in particular, as I mentioned, Rohini and I are both a part of the School Justice Project. So we really focus on helping young people who are facing court system related involvement. That's my work in particular is with court involved youth. We work with young people who are facing school suspensions, exclusion from school due to their behavior, bullying behavior, and we help these students get the support they need to address their academic and behavioral needs and succeed in school. So this is kind of an overview of our webinar for today. We're going to go through what we know, types of placements, general rights of court-involved youth. We'll move into the rights of court-involved youth with disabilities in particular, student rights once they're released from placement. We're going to go through some common issues and examples that you might see. We'll go through high school alternatives, some takeaways, and then resources. And I know it looks like a lot of information, but as I mentioned, we will send out the slides afterwards, and then they'll also be available. The presentation will be available on our website, so you can always watch it again if you like. So we're starting with what we know. So we know that youth in juvenile and/or child welfare systems are among the most educationally disadvantaged of all students and are often overage and undercredited. And by overage and undercredited, we're referring to students who don't have the standard number of credits that you might expect for their age, so relative to their peers. So they're technically behind in credits as compared to other students their age. We also know that nationally, nearly 2/3 of youth in the court system are Black and Latinx, and that about 65 to 70% of youth involved in the juvenile criminal legal system have a disability, and particularly a learning, emotional, or mental health disability. So this is what we refer to as the school to prison pipeline, and it's the process by which students are channeled from the educational system into the criminal legal system. And we know that students who are suspended are more likely to ultimately become involved in the juvenile criminal legal system. Though this is not to say that all students who are suspended are going to end up involved in the juvenile criminal legal system, but we do see that students who are suspended are more likely to miss class, then be held back a grade, face future suspensions, not graduate, and ultimately become involved in the juvenile criminal legal system. We also recognize that it is much more complicated than just a straightforward path. It's more like an intricate web, and we know that things like inadequate educational resources, being constantly transferred between schools, inadequate mental health or special education services, stigmatization in school based on needs or identities, disengagement and school avoidance, school policing and punitive school culture, and targeting by law enforcement all interact in really complex ways, which is how we ultimately see the school to prison pipeline manifest. Importantly, we want to highlight that Black students with disabilities who qualify for special education are suspended and expelled at especially high rates. Specifically, Black male students with disabilities are more than twice as likely to be suspended than their white counterparts with disabilities, and almost 10 times more likely to be suspended as white students without disabilities. Furthermore, students of color are more likely than their white peers to be identified and misidentified as needing services or support related to a disability, And then once given that label, they're more likely to learn in more restrictive environments and experience higher rates of discipline. And then additionally, without appropriate supports and interventions, students may be improperly told to stay home, placed on a truncated school schedule, sent to a hospital emergency room for behavior that could be otherwise managed by the school, otherwise excluded, and in essence, pushed out of school, which we'll discuss more later in the presentation. So we're going to move into the types of placements that there are in New York City. So there are three buckets that we're really going to focus on today. There's secure placement, non-secure placement, and limited secure placement. Non-secure placement and limited secure placement kind of live under an umbrella of close to home. And they can be folded together, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I like to think of them as kind of three distinct buckets since there are some differences in features between non-secure placement and limited secure placement. And we're talking about New York City ACS placements. So we're not talking about Office of Children and Family Services placements, which are mostly outside of the city, though I will mention those throughout the presentation. And we're also not discussing students who are on Rikers Island attending East River Academy, though again, I will mention Rikers and East River Academy briefly throughout the presentation. But if you know of students encountering issues in these facilities, you can always contact me and the SJP School Justice Project team. So the first bucket is secure detention. So currently there are two main secure detention facilities where youth in New York City are placed. There's Horizon in the Bronx and Crossroads in Brooklyn. Youth in both of these facilities are under the care of ACS, meaning that both facilities are run by ACS. However, youth who are placed there are attending schools run by Passages, which is a New York City Department of Education District 79 public school. And they're attending Passages in classrooms at the facilities. So they're not leaving the facilities for school, they're attending school in classrooms at either Crossroads or Horizon. Both of these facilities are more restrictive in their security features, and youth aren't allowed to leave. So in that way, they mirror traditional jail settings. So that's secure detention. And then, as I mentioned, we have close to home detention. And there are two types of close to home. There's the limited secure placement, or LSP, and the non-secure placement, or NSP. Both NSP and LSPs are operated by nonprofit providers. They're spread throughout the 5 boroughs. They're operated as group homes with anywhere from about 60 to 20 youth, though sometimes it can be a little more than 20. And then youth in LSPs attend school within the facility. So they don't leave for school, though they might leave for other reasons like field trips, I've heard. Whereas youth in NSPs and the non-secure placements are attending schools at Passages Academy sites within the community. So they leave their placement for school. And there are currently 7 Passages sites, including Crossroads and Horizon, spread throughout the city. Specifically, they're in Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, and Dobbs Ferry. That's where the Passages sites are. So some things we know about, some information that we have on students who are attending Passages Academy, which again is the DOE District 79 school that students in New York City secure and non-secure placements are attending. So as you can see from this bar graph, students who are male, Black, have disabilities, or are in the foster care system are dramatically overrepresented at Passages. As of October 2023, 100% of the students attending Passages were from low-income families, and despite comprising only 24.7% of New York City students overall, 61.6% of the youth attending Passages were Black. And then we see similar disparities with students who have IEPs and students who were in foster care. This is some additional information that we have about youth at Passages. So shown in this graph, as compared to all New York City students in grades 7 to 12, students at Passages are about 17 times as likely to be labeled as students with emotional disabilities, twice as likely to have learning disabilities, and 3 times as likely to have other health impairment classification. So that's kind of an overview of what we know about the system. We're going to move now into the rights of students in secure and non-secure detention, just kind of generally. And again, we're covering the rights of students who are in these New York City-based secure and non-secure detention, though as I mentioned, I will mention Rikers and OCFS at various points throughout. Um, so young people in New York have certain rights before, during, and after their involvement in the juvenile criminal legal system. So prior to any involvement, they have the right to behavioral and mental health services and other interventions that might prevent contact with the legal system. During system involvement, they have the right to regularly attend school, so long as they're within the correct age range. And they're also entitled to supports and services that will help them learn while they're in placement, including special education services. And then after they're discharged from placement, they should be provided supports to help them re-engage in school and ensure a smooth transition back into the community. So, students, including those who are in placement, have the right to attend school until they are 21 or 22 if they have an IEP and they've not been discharged, which I'll talk a little bit about. They must remain in school, so compulsory school, they must remain in school until the end of the school year when they turn 17, and then may stay in school until 21 or 22 if they have an IEP. The school year runs July 1st to June 30th. So this means if a student turns 17 on or after July 1st, 2026, they must stay in school until June 2027. But if they turn 17 on June 2026, say, they would no longer be compulsory school age as of June 30, 2026. So they would not have to stay in school through 2027. Some math is involved in that. So as I mentioned, students have the right to stay in school through the age of 21 or until they receive a high school diploma, with two exceptions. Yeah, students with IEPs, which as I mentioned, they can stay in school until the age of 22. And then students who are over 17 and have 20 consecutive school days, have missed 20 consecutive school days. These students can be discharged as long-term absent or LTA. But the school must schedule a planning interview first before they can discharge a student as long-term absent. And then students actually also have the right to re-enroll through the age of 21 or 22. And then one thing we want to highlight is push out. And we'll talk about it more later in the presentation as well, but we see that sometimes schools ask or suggest that a student 17 or older withdraw from school, and it may be due to behavioral issues, attendance, poor credits, court involvement, and we refer to this as push out, which as I said, we'll talk about more later, but students should not be pushed out unless certain criteria are met and procedures followed, and if you hear of this happening, you can contact AFC. And again, students have the right to stay in school until they are 21 or 22 with IEP. So while students are in secure or non-secure placement, they advance through school in the same way as all New York City students. So in high school, promotion depends entirely on how many credits you earn each year, and you can see that represented on this slide. So there's no modified promotion criteria for standardly assessed high school students with IEPs. Just a note about credits, they're double in New York City what they are in the rest of the state. So you need 44 credits to graduate in New York City, but only 22 elsewhere. It's the same requirements, it's just that in other districts, they give you 1 credit for the year versus 2 credits for the year. A reminder, this is important, when you're trying to figure out a student's correct grade placement, you really need to focus on the number of credits that they have, not the amount of time that they've spent in high school. So a student in their 3rd year of high school, you might think that they're in the 11th grade, but they might only have 6 credits, meaning that they would be in the 9th grade. So when you're thinking about a student who's transitioning out of placement and you're trying to find them an appropriate school placement, take a look at their transcript to see how many credits they have, including the credits that they've earned at passages, which we'll talk more about in a moment. And then for your information, AFC has on our website a high school graduation checklist, and it's kind of a fillable worksheet under the Find Resources tab, and it helps you kind of work through what are the graduation requirements that are needed for the individual in order to be promoted and ultimately graduate. So some information on the rights of students who are in placement. So students at passages must be given grade level work, We know that at some Passages sites, they might have middle and high schoolers in the same classroom, but their instruction should still be grade level. And if you hear otherwise, please let us know. Additionally, middle school students should be able to take citywide tests, and high school students must be able to sit for their Regents exams. And then, as mentioned, Passages is a DOE school, it's District 79. Therefore, all credits that are earned at Passages go on a student's DOE transcript and should be transferred once a student transitions out of detention or placement. The school must give students an education that puts them on track for promotion if they're a middle school student, or on track for a high school diploma if they're a high school student. And then also, I just want to note Passages is on a trimester grading system, and high school students at Passages earn credits based on completion of coursework during each trimester. And credits are awarded at the end of each trimester. So if a student leaves Passages before the end of a trimester, the student should be put into the classes they were taking while at Passages at their next school. So if they're in Algebra 1 at Passages, they should be in Algebra 1 when they get to the school in the community. And then also students who are below grade level can ask to get remedial services at Passages. And again, we're not talking about students who are detained in Office of Children and Family Services facilities, which are outside of New York City, but students who are in OCFS facilities are discharged from the DOE when they are sent to these OCFS facilities. And the result is that the credits they earn at the OCFS facilities do not automatically go on their DOE transcripts when they return to New York City. So the principal of the DOE school that the student attends once they return to the community has to review their transcript from the OCFS facility and decide whether they're going to grant credit. So this is something to know. But at OCFS facilities, students should still be able to take promotional tests and their Regents exams. So I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions before I move on, if people want to put them in the Q&A. We'll just take a moment for you to jot down your question if you have any, or if there's any questions. Yeah, Rainey.
I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. Someone did ask in the chat, do parents maintain educational decision-making authority if their child is in placement?
Yes.
Yes. And the answer is yes. Yeah.
The answer is yes. And we'll talk about that a bit more with IEPs and special education services, which we'll get into next. But are there any other questions? Okay, great. So we're going to move into the rights of court-involved youth with disabilities in particular. So students in both secure detention and close to home programs have the right to receive special education services. The parent of a student without an IEP who thinks that their child may have a disability may ask Passages for an initial evaluation. So Passages and District 79 are subject to the child find requirement of the IDEA, so they must identify all children in need of services. So a parent can ask Passages for the initial evaluation while their student is in placement. And that would include a psychoeducational evaluation conducted by the school psychologist, which includes an IQ test and academic testing in areas like reading, writing, and math, as well as classroom observations, a social history, and a review of a physical. And then the parent of a student who already has an IEP may ask Passages to reevaluate their child, even if it's not yet time for the triennial evaluation. So parents maintain those rights, and they can ask Passages to either do the initial evaluation or a reevaluation. And then parents whose children are at OCFS facilities or ACS facilities that don't attend Passages also have these rights. So those parents can also ask for the initial evaluation or reevaluation. And then students with IEPs have the right to receive special education services that are similar to those that are on their IEPs, which we'll talk more about on the next slide. So Passages Academy must get a student's IEP within 5 days of the student attending Passages. And then Passages uses that IEP to plan the services that the student will get while at Passages. So Passages should reach out to parents and work to develop what is called a special education plan, an SEP. And this is similar to an IEP. It's a fillable form, but it's not the same. There's this recognition that Passages is limited in its resources and its setting, and as a result, can't provide necessarily all of the things that are specified in an IEP, but might provide a narrower set of services. But it goes through testing accommodations, related services, and so they're receiving special education services. They just might be different from what is on an IEP because Passages might not have the staffing to provide the services that are specified on the IEP. Parents have the right to participate in the SEP meeting, and this meeting must be held within 30 days of the student's admission to Passages. Parents also have the right to participate in any IEP meetings that happen while the student is at Passages. The triennial evaluations for the IEP and annual IEP meetings should still occur even with the SEP and even when the student is in placement, though we recognize that this does not always happen. And then I want to highlight that in an ideal world, an IEP meeting would be held shortly before a student's release from placement to help plan the services that they'll receive at their next school. And this is something that a parent could request. This process of developing special education services that are different from an IEP, but services that the student will receive while in placement is also what must occur for students 21 and under with IEPs who enter Rikers and begin attending East River Academy. The one thing I want to note is that to begin attending East River Academy, the student must complete a request for educational services form, which is something that they get in their housing unit. But that's just something to know about Rikers. So now we're going to transition into a discussion of students' rights once they're released from placement. So students have the right to attend their former school so long as there are no court orders in place that prevent their attendance. And the court order may specifically prohibit their attendance or prohibit them from being near other individuals associated with or attending the school. And ideally, this is something that everyone will be aware of prior to transition out of placement, so that an appropriate school can be found well before release. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if a student transitions out of placement, secure or non-secure placement, mid-school year, the student should be placed in the same classes they were taking while at Passages once they're back in the community. And then I want to note that for students who are in foster care before and or after their placement, if they're going to be sent to a school, released to a school that is different from the school they were in prior to their placement, prior to their involvement in the juvenile criminal legal system and placement in a secure or non-secured detention facility, a best interest determination must be completed. So if the school is different from the one they entered placement with, a best interest determination meeting has to be held, certain forms have to be completed, and ACS approval secured. So if this is something you encounter and you have issues with, you can reach out to AFC for help. So this is Rights of Court-Involved Youth transitioning back into the community continued. Students at Passages, whether in close to home or secure placement, should be given a transition specialist. This used to be a designated position within Passages, and now it seems like they've given the role to other Passages staff, like the school social worker. But the transition specialist is responsible for coordinating education planning and should help support the student's return into the community for 6 months after the student is released. But it's unclear whether they're doing this for the full 6 months. Students who attend Passages should get a transition plan, which includes short-term goals for the student support network, and the student's next school placement. And then students at Rikers East River Academy should also get a transition specialist of some kind. So looking at transitioning from close to home specifically, so from these non-secure and limited secure placements, each student should have a placement and permanency specialist with ACS that plans for the student's reentry. And the specialist should work along with the DOE, the ACS education unit, and the close to home providers to plan for the youth's education reentry plan. The specialist should remain in communication with the youth's homeschool to ensure a smooth transition. And then specialists should also coordinate with the DOE and the Committee on Special Education where necessary to ensure that all evaluations are completed and submitted, meetings have occurred, and the youth's grade and credit status is clearly articulated. This is what should be happening. Specialists should also work alongside the DOE to ensure that appropriate school placement and transportation have been arranged. And then the specialist may use the youth's last home visit to escort the youth and their family to a family welcome center, an enrollment center with required documentation, and take additional next steps to find a school placement. And to ensure that the youth is immediately re-enrolled in school and so that there's no delay. So the last home visit can be used for this purpose. And then when there are unusual or special circumstances that prevent the parent from accompanying the youth to the enrollment office, the case planner or the ACS placement or permanency specialist may act in the parent's place if the parent signs an authorization form. And there's more information on kind of all the planning that happens with close to home release at that link. And again, we'll send the PowerPoint at the end, so you'll be able to access the link and see that information. So transitioning from secure placement as opposed to the close to home placement, youth in secure detention have limited resources for education reentry planning when compared to youth in close to home programs. So each student in a secure detention facility is assigned an ACS case manager. The case manager can offer help and be resources to parents of youth who are transitioning out of secure detention. The case manager can assist with getting a student's transcript, contacting someone at the DOE to help with placement. But unfortunately, parents are not provided with as much assistance as with close to home placements. So parents can visit their local family welcome centers once a youth has re-entered to get assistance with enrollment. And then I'd like to note that students returning from OCFS facilities should also go to a family welcome center in their borough to re-enroll in school once released. Students returning from OCFS facilities have the right to return to the DOE school they were attending only within the same year as they were discharged from that school when they were discharged from the DOE and sent to the OCFS facility. Otherwise, they'll likely be placed at a different school. But students have the right to be enrolled at a DOE school when they go to a family welcome center. So that's always a good first step. Students released from East River Academy at Rikers are automatically put back on the register at the DOE school they attended before they were arrested. And if a student does not wish to return to their former DOE school, they should talk to their transition specialist about getting another school before leaving. Alternatively, can go to the Family Welcome Center. And we'll talk about what to do if a student doesn't want to go to their former school in a later slide. And then just some general information about enrolling in school. So if a student comes out of secure or non-secure detention without a school placement, this is how you might go about getting the student enrolled in a community school. So if the student is grades K through 8, family should contact the zoned school. And then if there is no zoned school, go to the Family Welcome Center. And for high school students, you start with the Family Welcome Center. Importantly, students are not entitled to any specific school, but the Family Welcome Center will ask for your preferences. And then according to the chancellor's regulations, the DOE must arrange a placement for a youth within 5 school days. And we like to advise it's best practice if you kind of research schools that you're interested in and go to the Family Welcome Center with that list of schools. We're going to pause again for questions about what we've covered. If there's any questions about what we've covered so far.
I think there was one question about whether a student can ask for themselves for a special education evaluation. And the answer is they can ask for it. If they are under 21, then a parent will need to sign consent for the student to be evaluated. If a parent's unavailable, then the DOE should be working with the young person to either identify an adult who can sign consent, or they're able to actually appoint someone to be able to do that. So, but yes, a student can ask for an evaluation. It's just depending on, yeah, the parent will need to consent for the actual evaluation to occur.
Awesome. Thanks, Rohini. Okay. We will move to some common issues and examples. So these are some of the most prevalent issues that we see. So the first one is that the DOE often fails to provide students with school placement even after they're released. And this creates a large gap between the students' time at home and when they go back to school. Another issue we see is that once released, students struggle with receiving credits or grades earned while attending Passages Academy, even though it's supposed to be reflected on their DOE transcript. Another issue is Passages Academy staff fail to provide completed evaluations and IEP, SEP updates noting students' progress or regression, which is something they're supposed to be doing. And then another issue we see is once released, students often wish to explore alternative pathways to graduation, which we will touch on in this presentation, but parents have limited resources to get these students enrolled in these alternatives. And then if you encounter any of these common issues or see these things coming up, you should contact AFC. We work with many specialists, people within the DOE, people at Passages, and so we may be able to help resolve the issues that a student is facing. And then push out, which I've mentioned several times. This is another issue that we often see, especially with court-involved youth. And that's push out. So a student can't be pushed out of school, meaning told to leave or discharged because they are too old, specifically over the age of 18, but still younger than 21, because they are too behind in credits, because they have behavioral needs, by involuntary transfer, unless the proper procedure is followed, for poor attendance, unless the proper procedure is followed, or to pursue a different school, right? Sometimes they might suggest you should try a transfer high school. You should try to get your GED and do high school equivalency. This is push out, and they shouldn't be doing this. So as I mentioned, you shouldn't be pushed out for poor attendance. The student can only be discharged for attendance if they have more than 20 consecutive absences, are over the age of 17, and a planning meeting has been held. And the student must be informed of their right to re-enroll and invited to a conference. They should be offered at-risk services, including math and reading enrichment, counseling and tutoring for specific classes. There's a number of procedures and steps that must be taken before they can discharge a student as long-term absent. And then for involuntary transfers, again, as I mentioned, a student can't be pushed out by involuntary transfer unless procedure is followed. And that includes putting preventative measures in place, consulting with the parent and student, and holding a principals conference before an involuntary transfer. And you have the right to request a hearing. And the school must prove it's in the best interest of the student to be involuntarily transferred. And so if you encounter issues with push out, if this is something you see, again, you can contact AFC. So we're going to walk through an example. What if a young person is released from placement without a school? What might you do? What are your next steps? So ideally, the young person would still have the Passages transition specialist working with them for 6 months after release. Maybe it's not the full 6 months, but they might still be in contact with the family for some time following release. And so you could try to coordinate with the transition specialist on school placement. Additionally, the young person's ACS case may still be open. It should be until the docket ends. Students are usually released before their docket ends. And if so, the ACS education unit may also be a resource. Otherwise, the student and their family will need to visit a family welcome center if they're hoping to enroll in a DOE school. And if the family would like the young person to attend a non-public school, the CSE will need to be contacted so that a referral can be made. And then you can contact AFC if this is something that you see and something you're struggling with. Another example, what if the young person does not want to be placed in their previous school once they are released from detention due to safety concerns? First thing you want to do is check if there are court orders that prohibit their return to that school. But let's say there are no court orders prohibiting the student from returning to their previous school, but they still don't want to go back because of issues that they're having with other students. So what might you do? So you can request that Passages and the transition specialist identify a different school for the student to attend upon release. and ideally this would be finalized before the student is released from placement. If the young person is released with the same school placement, so it was not changed before their release, a safety transfer may be possible. To qualify for a safety transfer, the student has to have been a victim of a violent crime on school grounds, or they may be eligible for a safety transfer if they believe that staying at their current school puts them in danger. And usually you have to be able to point to a specific incident and documentation is required. So you want to determine whether there's any documentation of a conflict or other safety issues at the previous school. Are there documented fights? Are there police reports, incident reports, any complaints made by the young person about threats to their safety, any witness statements? These are all things that you want to look for. Parents can request a safety transfer through the school, and then a decision should be made within 5 business days. Alternatively, the family will need to visit a family welcome center if a safety transfer isn't possible, and then you can contact AFC. And then one final scenario, what if a student does not want a traditional high school or K through 12 placement because they are overage and undercredited? Let's say the student is 17 and only has 5 credits, meaning they would be a ninth grader. What are their options? So there are 4 primary alternatives we want to highlight, and I'll go through each of these in detail, but we've got transfer schools, YABCs, high school equivalency, and Restart Academy. So I'm going to go through each of them. So transfer high school. So these are small schools for overage, undercredited students. Students earn a high school diploma through transfer high schools. It's a full day of school. Students can earn up to 18 credits a year. Most transfer high schools have paid internships through Learning to Work and extra supports. And usually students must attend another high school first because they need some number of credits. Some transfer high schools are specifically designed for English language learners and have L programming. And then, as I mentioned, there are paid internships with up to 15 hours per week of work during the school year. So getting into a transfer high school, typically you want to get records, including the transcript from the student's former or current school. Then you want to contact the transfer schools of interest to apply. They all have their own individual application processes. You'll complete the intake process, which usually involves an interview, and then follow up if you haven't heard from the schools. So intake varies by school. Most have virtual and in-person open houses that you can attend. You can apply during in-person open houses, or most of these transfer high schools have online applications that can be submitted. Some require completion of an application, not all. Different schools have different credit and exam requirements. As I mentioned, some have a minimum number of credits to apply, usually 10. But then there are a number of transfer high schools that have no minimum. Schools can request a transcript, immunizations, and proof of address, but they shouldn't be asking for attendance records. But if you are running into issues with the application process, if the transfer high schools are demanding records that they shouldn't be asking for, you can contact AFC. And then, as I mentioned, there are typically interviews to get into a transfer high school. Most ask the same types of questions. It's important to prep a student before these interviews. And then they can't require students to take a test prior to admission. Most transfer high schools are listed on the DOE website. It's actually very helpful. They've got, their standard list of schools, and then they have their list of schools for students who are extremely undercredited. So those schools that don't have a minimum number of credits, don't meet the minimum number of, or schools that don't have a minimum number of credits to apply. So that's available on the website, which is really helpful. And then, as I said, you must apply directly to the transfer schools to enroll. They handle their own admissions. You can't be placed in a transfer high school through a family welcome center. You have to go through the transfer school in particular. But if you're denied from placement for more than 3 transfer high schools, you should contact our office. One other thing you might run into is sometimes students have IEPs that have District 75 specified on their IEPs, and transfer high schools might use this as a reason to not offer placement to a student. And so one thing that we've seen for some court-involved youth is needing to have IEP meetings in order to take District 75, where appropriate, off of their IEP so that they're able to apply to these transfer high schools. But that's if it's appropriate for the student and what the student wants and what the parent wants, since it is the parent who maintains the special education rights. So we're going to move into the next alternative, which is YABCs. So this is young adult borough centers. There are two models. The first model is full-time, meaning the student attends the YABC full-time. You must turn 18 before the end of the school year. The student earns a regular high school diploma. There are paid internships available, and then there are afternoon, evening classes Monday through Thursday. YABCs tend to require a higher level of maturity than a transfer high school. They're less supportive. Few are equipped to serve students with special education needs or English language learners, although some have some services. And then, as I mentioned, students who attend a YABC earn a high school diploma, and they actually earn it through their sending high school. And then, as I mentioned, paid internships available through Learning to Work. And then the second model of YABCs is shared instruction. So this is open to high school students of any age. Those students under 18 must have parent consent to participate. YABCs also accept students who continue to attend their sending high school during the day. So that's why it's shared instruction. They'll stay in their New York City high school, attend that high school during the day, and then attend afternoon, evening classes after the regular school day at the YABC. And it does makeup coursework. You can earn extra credits. So yeah, that's YABCs. Getting into a YABC. You get or stay enrolled in a regular high school. You ask a counselor to fill out one of these forms. I don't know what they mean, but it's Y1 and Y2 or S1 and S2. The school will know, the school counselor will know. You send the forms to the YABC to enroll, and then you start attending. There are two principals who oversee all the YABC programs, one for Manhattan and the Bronx, and one for Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens. And if you encounter problems with enrolling in a YABC, you can contact our office. Oh, and there's also our Google Drive for flyers and more info about transfer school and YABC admissions, so something that AFC has. Then there's the high school equivalency program. So this is Pathways to Graduation, or P2G. It's free and operated by District 79. You must be 17 to 21. There's day and evening programs. There's full-time and part-time. Some are bilingual Spanish. This is a way to take the GED and take the exam, and it's all about preparing for the exam, Pathways to Graduation. And so we typically say that it's best to have about fifth grade reading level in order to pursue pathways to graduation, because it's all about preparing for the exam. So it's not like traditional classroom instruction. It's about instruction that prepares you to take the high school equivalency exam. But that is another option for students. Students must go to a referral center, attend orientation, and take the TABE to register in Pathways to Graduation. And students with IEPs are entitled to testing accommodations for the GED, and that's something that you would apply for each time that you have to take the exam, if you have to take it more than once. And then lastly, there's Restart Academy. So this is part of District 79. It has several sites across the city, many in community-based organizations. Students typically stay about 1 year. It's for mental health and substance use treatment. There are programs for overage middle schoolers as well. They have DOE teachers. There are middle school, high school, and HSE programs. Most are day programs, some are residential, and like transfer high schools, you contact the program directly to enroll. So those are the alternatives that we wanted to highlight. And the last thing is key takeaways. So Students must attend school if they're within the compulsory school age. Remember, that's 17, but they may stay in school until they're 21 or 22 with an IEP, and education can't be denied. Students have the right to attend the school they previously attended prior to detention or placement, so long as there are no court orders preventing such. Parents have the right to be informed and participate in IEP, SEP, or general education meetings pertaining to their child's progress while their child is attending Passages Academy. And students have the right to receive special education services in both secure and close to home placement. Um, an ACS specialist or an ST case manager, as well as a passages transition specialist, should assist a student and family with education-related planning for reentry. Parents can connect with the school psychologist at Passages to request an evaluation or reevaluation if their child has or may have a disability. And then you can always go to a family welcome center if released without a school placement or in need of another school placement. And then, as I've said throughout, you can always contact AFC at any point if there are education related issues for court involved youth. That's what I do, what SJP does. So you can always connect with us. And my email will be on the last slide, so you will have that. We just wanted to provide some DOE transition support contacts if you are advocating on behalf of a student and you're in need of, you want to contact someone either at Passages or within District 79. There's Crystal Wright, who is one of the Passages Academy assistant principals, the assistant principal of transition. That is her email and phone number. And then if you need additional support and want to contact District 79, Stacy Oliger, there is her information as well, Family and Community Empowerment Administrator. So those are two contacts for those who are working with young people who are encountering issues. And then you can always call us. As I mentioned, there's our helpline number, there's our general email, and then there's my email if you are encountering any of these issues.